And welcome to the December Crozet Community Advisory Council meeting. I'm Dave Stoner, the chair. We'll start, as we always do, with introductions. Costas, you want to start?
Costas Summers, CAC member.
John McKeon, likewise.
I'm Jenny Moore, I'm the Whitehall District Planning Commissioner liaison.
Kim Gunther, CCAC.
Ann House, Whitehall District Supervisor. Allie Pesh, CCAC.
Doug Bates, CCAC.
Sam Vermeer, CCAC.
Mike Kunkel, CCAC.
Sean Bird, CCAC.
Tom Lopes, CCAC.
I introduce myself. Do you guys want to just introduce yourselves?
Sure. Chris Hernandez with Milestone Communications, we're the tower developer.
I'm Lori Schweller, I'm an attorney with LaClaire Ryan, and we're representing Milestone Communications.
Ryan Fletcher with Network Building and Consulting. We're representing Chantel, possible carrier from COVID.
Mark Graham, Community Development, Albemarle County. I'm sitting in pinch-hitting tonight due to illness for Chris Perez, who's the lead planner on this application.
I'm Korea Wood, School Technology. I'm sitting in as well for Ira Sokol, who could not be here tonight for the school side of it.
I'm Thomas Jackson, student at Western Iowa High School.
I'm Mary Ann Jackson.
John Jackson.
Rob Cushing, neighbor.
Elizabeth Hillis, neighbor, adjoining property.
Yes, Guy Hillis, neighbor.
And the man behind the camera.
Anonymous.
We sent our agenda around as sort of short and sweet. I think the one thing we may add, since we're going to have some time, I think last time Costas, I think last time Costas made a suggestion about whether we wanted to say anything to the board of supervisors about the infrastructure needs in the area. So since we thought we had some time, we might discuss that briefly.
The concept of growth versus infrastructure, right? Because it's disproportionate.
So anyway, since I think all some time, we're going to touch on that. Any other changes, additions to the agenda? All right, we'll go with it as is. There are minutes sent around. Thanks, Mike, as always. I don't know if folks got a chance to look at those. If so, does anybody want to go ahead?
Motion to accept.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. And with that, we'll go to the milestones. Lori and Chris?
Thank you, Dave. Thank you to the committee for allowing us to present to you today. This is an application that Milestone Communications submitted on October 30th, and we're in the early stages of zoning, and a community meeting is part of that process. And so you have graciously allowed us to use your regular committee meeting to have our community meeting to explain this project and to gather questions from you. I have cards up here, and I want to share my contact information with everyone who may not have it. So this is just the beginning of our conversation, and feel free to contact me at any time after this meeting. Again, my name is Lori Schweller. I'm an attorney with LaClaire Ryan here in Charlottesville. I live in Corey Farm. I've been a member of this community for many, many years. Chris Hernandez is the project lead with Milestone Communications, and Ryan Fletcher is the zoning consultant with MD&C on behalf of Chantel, which is the dedicated carrier for this proposed facility. Also, on behalf of the schools, Korea Wood is here if we have questions about what the schools would like to do with this proposed facility. Just a little background on Milestone. It's Virginia-based, it's in Northern Virginia, and their business model is to partner with municipalities and school systems in order to construct wireless facilities to share rent with those landlords and then to rent out space on the monopoles to wireless carriers. The financial benefit of this proposed wireless facility for Western Albemarle, those benefits are listed here. They're the same as the ones we have had zoned, and actually one is being constructed at Albemarle High School and Stony Point Fire Department. And they are for a 10-year lease term with 4 or 5-year extensions. There are fees, one-time fees when the pole is constructed and when carriers go on the pole, and then there's rent sharing with the schools. The reason this facility is needed is there is a coverage gap. This is a computer modeling showing wireless coverage provided by Chantel. This area here is the area that Chantel is trying to cover, and this map shows you with computer modeling what that coverage would be. I want to show you that all together. And in relation to Google Maps, you have a sense of what this coverage area is. Chantel is a dedicated carrier for this proposed facility, but we have interest, Milestone has interest from Verizon and T-Mobile. Verizon has begun work with them on a lease and to discuss terms. Here's another map so you can get a sense of the coverage area. All right, so this is the site location. This is Western Albemarle here, and the football field. There are woods here, and the proposed site location is here on the edge of the football field. It's about 1,450 feet to Route 250, and we're showing here the distance to the closest house. See the names. We're looking behind the bleachers. The access to the site is actually under the bleachers, but this will be the construction entrance, and then the site will be back here.
It's not going to affect the bleachers at all.
No.
So it's just going to...
Which bleachers are those? The football field?
Yes.
Oh, right.
So this is just to give you a sense that this is the construction entrance here, but if the facility is constructed, the access for the technician who comes to check on it once or twice a month is under the bleachers, the access. So the design is a small lease area that would have room for multiple carriers. There would be cedars in the front for screening. This is an elevation, a schematic to show the type of facility we're talking about, a monopole, which will be painted brown with brown antennas. And so these are, again, just a schematic showing antenna arrays. The top height would be 145 feet. And then we're requesting from the county a special exception to permit up to 5 carriers. The Albemarle County zoning ordinance permits up to 3 carriers by right, so a special exception is required for more. And the reason why this is important is because carriers today use so many technologies that to get all of their technologies and to provide adequate service at one point on a pole, they need to have this type of design. This will allow the schools up top, which is a free rent here, Intel here, and then Verizon and T-Mobile and the other carrier.
Let me ask the question. How wide is the array? How wide are those, the top?
This is 96 inches. We'll provide, this is 40 inches here. So there will be there'll be 3 antennas on each of these triangular sides.
12 feet across, 14 feet across, something like that. Outside to outside.
Right here, 12 feet right here.
Right, from left to right, so it's going to be.
Right, and then 40 inches from here to here.
That's considered monopole.
A little
Yes.
bit 18 inches, which is flush.
Yes, and this note is just to indicate that for treetop monopoles in Albemarle County, the performance standard is 18 inches, 12 to 18 inches, and so we're requesting a special exception. This is a tier 3, which requires a special use permit, so without getting into too much detail, these special exceptions are requested for each of those differences from a tier 2. And I'll be happy to answer questions about that. It's rather complicated.
Can you say again what the standoff is?
Yes.
Greater than that of 18?
So the standoff for a tier 2 monopole is 12 inches from the base of the monopole to the back of the antenna at its closest point. And if the antenna is tilted, then 18 inches is permitted from the face of the monopole to the back of that antenna where tilted. That's the maximum 18 inches. That's called a flush mounted antenna. What we're proposing here, this is not exactly the face of the monopole, but it's approximately 40 inches from the monopole to this face.
Okay. So what's the parameter that's an apple-to-apple comparison? So what's the distance from the back to the pole?
It's roughly 40 inches, roughly 40 inches.
So it sticks out from the pole for you,
Yes, yes.
as
Uh-huh.
opposed to 18 inches?
Exactly. This is I'm sorry, this is a cross section, so this is the monopole.
Okay.
And then the antennas are placed along each of these 3 faces.
So do the antennas stick out from this?
So the antennas are perpendicular to each one of these bars.
Right, so it's actual distance is going to be
So
more.
what we're
than-
showing you is a triangle like this on a monopole, and the antennas are placed vertically on the side.
I'm just saying, so this doesn't include the antenna.
That's correct.
But you said they're placed vertically, they don't stick further out
That's
horizontally.
correct.
Okay.
Right.
Unless they're tilted.
Sorry, I was trying to go back so I could show you the elevation, but I seem to be going in the wrong direction. So at each level, there's a platform, and then those antennas are attached to the side vertically. So the maximum standoff would be, let's say, 40 inches.
And what's the height of the tree line?
The total height of this facility is 145 feet. The tree line would be roughly 80 feet, 70 to 80 feet.
So it was about 70 to 80 feet above tree line.
Well, it depends on, and the reason I'll show you photographs is it depends on your vantage point as to how far it appears above the tree line. So we'll show you those photographs.
Sure.
And that actually is the purpose of the balloon test, which I described, so that you can actually see what that looks like.
I don't know if you'll get this, but what does the school use one for? I don't know if that's a naive question, but
Sure. And we can get into that in great detail, but I can't answer the question. The school will be installing LTE wireless as part of their broadband project. They have, currently there are antennas on Albemarle High School, and they're moving those to the Milestone monopole at Albemarle High School and at other schools. They have a network, and it's a closed network for
Okay.
students and teachers.
okay.
So those are currently on the building as well.
There are none at Western.
But they could be either
They're
right
out-
on
they're
or
out
on the
there.
building.
So
They're on the
There
building.
are
now.
alternatives to do that.
Okay.
Go ahead,
So the question is this for Albemarle County schools or just the school itself, to use for the students?
The entire division, schools.
Okay, so I just wanted to understand that. Okay.
The schools would be connected, right, Mr. Wood?
This connects one school to another school. No.
So the school system has wireless spectrum, just like any of the companies, Verizon, T-Mobile, all that kind of stuff. So this would be essentially as we are a carrier. We would be plugged into our own network and be able to broadcast that signal and have units out at schools with students that would be able to connect back to this wireless signal. And essentially it's an extension of our network that we already have in the schools and between the schools.
And please don't take this as me challenging schools, but
Sure.
this is it's a pretty,
It is.
pretty giant. I mean, do you need that much reach? I guess, do you need this magnitude of reach to reach just the school facility? Is that what you're trying to cover?
We're trying to cover the community. So this project, the overall scope is to reach to the students, locations that students are in which they may not have access to that kind of wireless technology. And so we'd be able to provide them that access in which it would tie back into our system.
So when you say reach to them, what do you mean by reach? Is that a mile, 5 miles, 10 miles? What kind of reach are you looking
The
at?
higher you can get, the further we can go. Kind of stuff. So 15 kilometers is usually the max that we can get with our equipment that we'll be putting up there.
And do you have a survey of how many underserved children are around the school?
That's probably going to be a better question for Ira. I believe they do have those maps, those population maps, and then as well as our estimated coverage maps that we've thrown together.
This is just to show the owners that we notified of the balloon testing at the community meeting. And now I'd like to show you, to answer the previous question, what we foresee as potential visual impact from the facility. We did a balloon test in September before the leaves were off the trees, and driving up and down 250 and Miller School Road, I wasn't able to see the balloon. Just to back up a step, a balloon test is literally raising a balloon to the proposed height of the facility. It's a 4-foot in diameter red balloon, and it's on a string that, to make sure that it's exactly the right height. And then we drive around, we take photographs, and we create photo simulations. When the leaves are on the trees, this site is not visible except immediately in front of the school, and I'll show you that photograph. But when we did the second balloon test, the public one, about which you all were notified, there were additional locations where the balloon could be seen, primarily through the trees when they don't have leaves on the trees 4 months out of the year. So I'll show you those and show you the photo simulations created from the photographs. This is the photograph from 250 in front of the school. The arrow is pointing to the red balloon. This is a close-up of the same location.
And the diameter of the brown pole, excuse me for interrupting, from the balloon down, it's like 2 feet in diameter at the top and goes down to 36 inches at the bottom, the diameter of the monopole.
It's not a standard 18-inch at the top, 36-inch at the bottom monopole. I don't think I have.
It's different than a string as far as its visibility. It will be significantly different than what you're showing in the picture.
And that's part of the reason we do the photo simulations to show, and it's.
That's the simulation.
So that's the simulation right there. This is what it's going to look like.
And that has
that
one tier, and you would have 5. So do you have a simulation of the 5 tiers on there? Because that would look radically different as well.
We don't. We don't.
Is that the top or is
Go
that?
4
is that
more up.
the-
You would go 4 more up.
Yeah.
That's the top.
We'll go 4 down.
So they would go
Oh, 4
down.
down.
Right.
But the bulk of it.
May I interrupt for just because I may have missed something and I just want to be sure I understand. So Almar High School right now has these antennas, what do we call them, on the school itself, and they've moved it to a monopole for the school. And what Ann was saying earlier is that for Western Albemarle High School to get this, they could also have something like that installed on the school building itself. So the advantage to this is, and I'm asking the question, is it that it can reach more students versus just having the antenna on the school, which is a lower building? But also, what is the economic incentive of this, because that I'm wondering which is the driver of this, if we're really trying to help the students, but now we're going to have 5 arrays on a large pole, and Verizon's in it, and Sprint's in it, and whoever else is in it. I'm wondering what's more important to the county.
Right, it is a twofold benefit. So, as Priya was saying, when you have the antennas 145 feet off the ground, you're able to promulgate that signal much farther. Also a stronger signal, a better signal to students in the area. And we did have modeling maps when we did Albemarle High School to show how many more students would be served in the area, students who didn't have broadband otherwise. It's a closed, you may be familiar with it, but the school has a closed internet system that the students use and the teachers use, the administration use. And
Could I interrupt you? I don't have a kid in the schools right now, so I don't know. This is just for the high school. But we have middle school, we have 2 elementary schools here as well.
Right.
Does this access them, or does it make them more involved and engaged in this network?
So it's for the entire division, so there is no distinguishing between high school, middle school, elementary school. So once that's broadcasting a signal, then the student, whatever level they're at, would have a device, and if they can receive that signal, or within that range and have it strong enough, they then will receive that signal and would be directly attached into the school system as if they were sitting in the classroom.
Okay, so there is currently, or there could be, an array on the Western Albemarle High School right now.
Sure.
But that probably wouldn't reach.
That would not be as beneficial as 145 feet, just from a propagation standpoint to the extension of the wireless technology.
And once we know where the real service gaps are, we
Right.
might be able to actually say that.
So this and the Albemarle High School are just 2, which the benefit is we can be on a pole that is at that height. There are other installations that are going to happen across the school division on schools or school sites that will just be on the top of the building itself.
Okay.
So these are just 2 of 20 plus that are strategically positioned and
But as we move forward, we'll be able to see those students, the coverage that students would get from this versus something mounted on the side of the school.
I don't know if we have a propagation from the top of Western Albemarle High School. I think that we had a model from Henley, I believe, was more of the central location when we had first looked at schools where they're at, just because of where Western is lying and where we would have to put it. So we have a model from this tower and we have one from Henley. So it's not too far off from Western, but yes, you would be able to see the difference between those two. I believe Vince, before Vince left, had a lot of that documentation and presentation. So I would assume the IRA would possibly have it or be able to get a hold of it if needed.
And this would benefit students who are strictly working on schoolwork, or does this basically give their household internet access?
Schoolwork. So it would be a limited, just as if we do in the classrooms, that it would be limited and filtered for use. It's not for parents to jump on and Netflix. It is a technology that can be gobbled up real quick. A ton of people are on it. And again, we're not a Verizon, so the capacity and the infrastructure is not there like you see going down 64. So we know that. So it has to be limited. It has to be focused on the real needs.
So this is going to show up, so if I had my phone or my laptop, if I'm a student, it's going to show up as like Western Albemarle,
Show up as
closed network.
ACPS. So
The
ACPS.
just
same
like
way
you
if
see
you walk in
Verizon.
this, yeah.
Yeah.
Or from Western today, it's the same way when you walk into this building, it's the JMRL
Okay.
Wi-Fi, would be the ACPS Wi-Fi. And you have to say agree, but they have to log in, because I won't be able to use it.
It's LTE
It's different
technology.
than this building.
So
This is
hotspots, cell phones, they have outdoor units, user units. So there's a bunch of different options, and I know that that's being talked at a different level than where I'm at right now. The logistics of how to distribute and what that system looks like and a support infrastructure for that.
Is it Hillis?
Yes, thank you.
So to finish answering what you really asked me, the impetus was Dean Tisdale, who is head of IT for the schools. I'm sorry, it's probably not his correct title. He was in Northern Virginia, and he had worked in Fairfax County with Milestone for many school facilities, and then when he came to Albemarle County, he was very much interested in getting this type of partnership with Milestone again to provide better service to the school system. But the other benefit, you're absolutely right, is the economic benefit at being a landlord for Milestone's tower. Not only does the school it doesn't have to construct the tower, it doesn't have to pay rent for the service that it receives, but it actually receives fees and rent from the carriers.
So it receives fees, the school system would receive fees from Verizon and Sprint, and like anybody else who is has an array, is that correct?
It's through Milestone, but the lease with
Sure.
Milestone provides that, let's say, Chantel goes on, the monopole is built, the school gets $20,000. Chantel goes on, it gets $5,000. Each time another carrier goes on, it gets $5,000. Throughout the life of that lease, which may be 25 years, the school gets 40% of all rent coming from every carrier on there, through the Milestone payments. So over the course of time, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So, and just a quick question, does that go into the general fund, or does it go directly to the school?
It goes on to the school as far as I understand.
It doesn't go to the general fund?
So to which schools, though?
The whole school department.
So,
The
So it
school
does go-
system.
Not the county.
Schools, general funds, not county general funds.
okay,
So it doesn't directly benefit Western
Goes to the
or
school board.
the other Crozet schools?
so it's the school board, okay.
Now, does the school board take into account where these towers are? Since
I wish they were here, I'm
they're,
sorry, I don't have an answer.
they're sort of, I mean, if we decide to host the tower, wouldn't it make sense to proportionally benefit from having this tower?
What do you think, Western, you mean? Is that what you're saying?
Or Western schools.
Crozet schools, right? I mean, we'd be the ones sort of most affected. Then it goes back into the general fund and gets divvied up to everybody? That seems strange.
Anyway, that's not your issue, I'm sorry.
Monopole structures in that configuration, how many have Milestone deployed, and what is the safety record of those against wind, fire?
How many towers in total?
How many towers in that configuration has Milestone deployed, and what is the safety record of that tower with that configuration? Have you put
At this point, over 100, and there has never been any incident.
100 with 4 on top? So last year, when we had the fire, that was not your tower? In another location here in Virginia, when a cell phone tower caught on fire?
I don't think so, because I don't know about that, so.
The other question I have is with the enhanced reach of this, do we have infrastructure, and I think we've talked about it, but I'd be very interested in seeing how we've arrayed the infrastructure that's going to be necessary to drive the traffic once it hits the network. Right, so we're going to ostensibly put this thing up, and then we're going to have a whole bunch of people looking at a spinning ball while the infrastructure at the school level processes the packet traffic from the increased volume of inbound traffic, right? So we're going to be beefing up the infrastructure, right, to take advantage of the traffic.
Yeah, so I mean, the technology has its limitations. So again, the spectrum that Albemarle County owns isn't as large as some of the corporations have. So they've built and bought a lot of that spectrum to be able to do what you do when it comes to that video streaming. That goes back to that we'll have to limit what type of technologies, what type of applications can be used when connected to it. So there is a finite limitation to the spectrum that we have and how fast it can go and how many users are on that.
But is it fair to say that the spectrum is not the rate limiter? The rate limiter will be the infrastructure at the school level that will be able to process the information coming from the spectrum.
So the school system's infrastructure is quite robust, and a lot of credit to Vince with the upgrade that he's done. But we have a 10 gig backbone between all of the schools themselves, as well as to the data centers, and then on top of that, they aggregate 10 gigs of internet bandwidth as well. So I don't foresee a bottleneck when it comes to the fiber optic infrastructure connecting that tower to the school, to the WAN between the schools. From my standpoint, it would be the actual spectrum and how many devices are connected to that wireless technology.
I guess that's kind of my point, is if you're inviting a whole bunch more people to connect, then even with 10 gig, you're going to stress that. Is that dark fiber that we've leased? Or?
So I believe we have 14,000 students, I think, give or take-ish, in the school division, and roughly on the heaviest days that we see internet traffic, we do not reach above 1.5 gig of actual internet traffic. That does not take into account WAN traffic between the schools, but that would be pure students accessing internet resources back in and out. That they reach and max out about 2 gigs out of the 10 that are currently there.
Right, and that's between the schools. Now, if we take it down to within the schools themselves, we don't have fiber optic cables within Western Illinois High School, as near as I can tell.
We do.
We do? So we're able to
the-
network between classrooms via fiber optic and wireless?
The infrastructure within the building is brought into the school either by our own fiber optic or by leased CenturyLink fiber optic. And then within the building is distributed out to the different wings or different areas of the school via fiber optic. And then from that point, from the switch, it is copper. So Cat 6 copper gigabit connections from there.
So gigabit is your rate limiter then for the last mile, to say, within the school itself?
Within the school for the wireless access points inside the school, yes, each wireless access point has a 1 gig uplink connection to it.
Thank you.
For instructional space, yes.
This is also from front of the school, near the soccer field, and that's the photo simulation with the facility in the back here. This is, of course, on the school property, so obviously you will see the pole quite clearly. There's the balloon, and there's the photo simulation. This is at the intersection with Old Trail. It's hard to see with the lights, but you can see the photo simulation. These are photographs that Ms. Jackson provided me from her own property. And you can see there's the balloon through the trees. This is a location, Savannah Court, next to the school, where when the leaves were on the trees, I didn't see the balloon during the September balloon test. So in the months when the leaves are off the trees, you'll see it through the trees. And this is one of the reasons why we're using brown. It looks kind of gold, but it actually is a specific brown color that the county has decided for wireless facilities. This is also the same property, just more photographs, another photograph and a photo simulation.
I will take issue as the property owner that is above the tree line, and the trees that you see partially obscuring the view are actually in the foreground. So it does appear above the tree line from the top of our driveway.
This is, we're standing on 250 in front of Brownsville, and we're looking across the street. These are photographs taken by the county planner, Chris Perez. There's the balloon, and this is a photo simulation. So we're looking down a private driveway, and this is the home at the end of the private driveway, where one of the property owners is here. And so these are photographs that a county planner took from that location.
I do think with future presentations, you should add all 5 tiers to that, because it just is way bulkier with 5.
And that's perspective, but that's a good point. The balloon isn't visible in this photograph the county planner took, and he asked me to show this one. So this is a view, we're in the old trail now, and we're looking at quite a distance. It's hard to see the balloon from this distance, so with a zoom, you can see the balloon in the distance. And so, in my opinion, this photo simulation is far more, has far more impact than it will in real life, just from my experience. I mean, this is heavily zoomed, but we produced photo sims that we were asked to produce based on photographs that we received. As you can see, that distance in that previous picture is 1.5 miles, so it's not going to look like that at that distance.
Why not? I don't understand the disconnect.
Well, I wish we could make them a little more, it's just at that distance, it's very difficult to see, and especially through the trees. You can see here again. When the leaves are on these trees, you won't see the facility, and then when they are, but we're not able to make it look like it's behind the trees. It looks like it's in front of the trees, so it's the best we can do here. This is a property immediately behind the school, Emerald Lane, and the balloon is visible from this property. You can see that this is the property and this is the school. So we have several photographs from this location, right at the driveway, the photo simulation. Across the field, it's so close to the school that you can see the ball field lights there in the background. And so there's the field again. And again, it looks like it's right.
Number 5, that's significantly different from that.
Yeah.
This is from Miller School Road, and from Miller School Road, the views were through the trees. It's quite a distance to the school at that point.
Can I ask another question? Can you explain again why, and I missed this in the description, why it's instead of being on top of the school, that it's in a location off the football field, different than I guess how it is at Albemarle High School? Is that correct?
Albemarle High School had some antennas on the school at the time that Milestone filed its application to construct the facility there. And the schools wanted to get those antennas bigger and higher and more robust, and so that's why they wanted that monopole there. And that monopole has been constructed. Western does not have antennas, I understand from Trio. So this is a dramatic improvement of service for the schools in that location.
How tall is the pole at Albemarle?
I think it's 125.
So we're not even talking about apples to apples, right? Because it's,
Well, it's a lot.
this is 145 and that was 125?
I think it's 125, and it's also close to the ball field in that area. The schools select the location based on other uses of the property.
Does it have a similar setup?
Arrays.
Multiple arrays?
It has, I believe, a max of 4.
How tall, do you know how tall the lights are at the football field?
80 to 90 people.
And how firm is the 145? I mean, is it like, if we don't do 145 economically, it doesn't make sense, so we're not interested? Or is there wiggle room to lower it, understanding that you'll get less coverage, but that's a potential trade-off?
There is a trade-off, because at 145, each carrier can use 1 point on the monopole for all of its technology, for the best service, separation of the wavelengths on the spectrum, all of them. If it has to be shorter, then you won't get as many carriers on there. Ideally, every carrier who needs to serve this area could be here, and then you wouldn't have other wireless facilities dotting Crozet. That would be the goal. But if it were shorter, you would have fewer carriers and less rental schools.
One question about the base that the monopole is located on top of. Do you know the material and the surface area of non-absorbent surface that will be put in?
I believe it's concrete that the monopole is set into.
So will you be evaluating the impact on soil erosion rates in the local area as a result of including service?
Yes.
Non-service service area? Did you do that with Albemarle's poll, and what were the findings with that?
Yes, there's a lot of due diligence that goes into building these facilities based on federal regulation, state regulation, and local regulation. And I don't have that data with me to answer questions about it, but I'd be happy to share it later.
Do you have a photograph of the Albemarle pole and the base that he was just discussing? Is there a photograph of actually what this is going to look like that you have?
I don't.
Or any
We
of
will
the
add
other
that.
hundreds?
Existing, yeah, from the existing.
Any existing poles?
Yeah, the ground equipment won't be visible off-site. It's a lease area, fenced, landscaped. So unless you're going into the lease area, you wouldn't see any of the cabinets or equipment that support the monopole. And that's why we only do photo simulations of the monopole from off-site parcels. But we can certainly get those photos for planning commission here and for the supervisors here.
The measurement of your ground equipment lease is what dimension? I saw it on one of your drawings earlier, I just didn't catch it in time.
It's roughly 2,500 square feet total.
20 by 100.
2,500.
2,500, okay, so that's totally paved and then has structure on top of it.
Is it totally paved or does it have gravel between the lease areas?
So it's a fenced-in area. It's basically a big square, and it's gravel on the ground, and then you have the cabinets installed on top on concrete pads. And that's completely locked and closed in. It's fenced in with slats for concealment. And, rarely ever opened. These towers don't need a lot of wings. So typically you may have one person who visit, and then we have regulations in place for the schools in terms of people checking in, so people can visit the facility and all that. So those procedures have been put in place.
Is it outside the existing fence around the football field?
It's on the other side of the fence, in the tree area.
So you're cutting down all those trees right next to the field right there?
There will be some there, yes.
So there are critical slopes in that area.
There is a running path through there.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear from those who live right next to it. What do you guys think about this?
I use that walking path to walk home every single day, so you'd be directly putting something in the way of me walking home. My other concern is that due to the location being a more steep forest, and even in the recent years with the heavier rain seasons in the summer, just naturally I've seen walking on that path heavier rates of sloping on the hill, more soil erosion due to just natural rain. And my concern is that the construction equipment rolling in, the heavy machinery used to install this unit will damage the root systems of the topsoil enough to cause flow, and that I don't think that remediation, just from moving the construction equipment back and forth to put this thing in place, I don't know if remediation would be immediate enough to prevent enough soil erosion that, enough with aesthetics affecting the property itself, soil flowing down the hill affects the natural area which is accessed on our property, which means that we have soil flowing down and compiling in the basin of our property, which would be a discourager for future owners to enjoy the natural areas of the property if there's increased soil collection and sedimentation at the base. So my concern is that environmentally, this will have severe impacts because of construction at the tops of hills, unless you're doing full remediation of the soil to ensure that topsoil loss is not happening. It has a much more long-term effect that's harder to remediate other than just dumping more dirt on top and holding it in, and you still don't get rid of that dirt that's at the bottom.
The county will be in control of that steep slopes issue that you talk about during construction. Though there are no steep slopes in the area of the lease area, the construction will involve that, so we will have to get permitting that the county will monitor for construction only.
You asked about other landowners. We're the closest property to the
Like a Z that goes around.
Yeah, with a Z that
everything.
wraps around it. So we're 30 feet from this structure. And, my take on it is that, we've got crappy cell phone service in our house. And if Verizon is able to be on the tower and we can talk on our phones in our house, yes, we have to look at a pole that's not so attractive. But from my standpoint, I'm okay with that. It's progress, it helps the school. So that's my take.
Can I go back to the school question? I wanted to follow up. The students currently at Western Albemarle, how do you access the proprietary network that's available through the Albemarle County Public Schools?
So two different wireless technologies, but the internal wireless technology, the students use their actual laptops with the built-in radios.
And what do they log into?
So the two signals that are currently on Albemarle County Schools are ACPS and ACPS Public.
And I guess I'm not being as technical as I should be. I'm trying to figure out how students reach the system currently and how many more students would be able to reach the system. I'm sorry?
It has to be at the school, right?
For this technology, for the LTE technology, it's think about it, it's just like your phone. We would have SIM cards, we would have devices.
Now, currently.
Oh, now? So they have to be at the school or within proximity of a wireless access point that is installed either at
Okay,
the
so it's
school.
like a router in the schools.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think
This would be
the
a
furthest
tower.
one is the press box has a wireless access point that.
Okay,
that gives
and so you
short
have a
coverage.
map up there very briefly that showed the reach, the extension that this tower would get for the
For
students.
Chantel.
For
That
Chantel.
map is only for Chantel. We don't have a propagation map for the schools at this point.
For the other, and this is what you were asking about, that this is what we need, right?
Well, it's not what the board is going to deal with, because we have wireless ordinance we have to deal with, and I'll ask Mark to address that in a few minutes. But as far as the numbers of children served, I think that would be appropriate information. If you're using the schools as a reason to do this, it would be nice to know what the real impact is.
Right, that's
So
exactly
that was
what
what my question was
Yeah.
about.
Sorry.
I have a question, just what is the economic incentive for Milestone to put it at the school? Like, why do you want to do it at the school as opposed to, somewhere else, private property?
Well, it's just our business model. That's, our business model is we work with municipalities and we work with public entities, and that's where we're experts in the industry. Going to public-private partnerships and sharing revenue with those partners that we make. And we've been doing that for the last 10 years. Probably our biggest client when we built in those towers is Fairfax. I've been working with them for 30 years, and I've built approximately 12 towers in rental schools, in rental schools, principal and county parks. So, it's just the business model. That's what we do, that's what we're good at.
It's the niche you all have.
Yes.
And then is there any health studies as far as, radiation from these towers for people hanging out underneath them?
Yeah.
And what's the study for there?
The Federal Communications Commission,
Okay.
the Federal Communications Commission has adopted a set of standards that all carriers must comply with. And facilities like we're showing to you today typically put out effective radiation of hundreds to 1,000 times less than what is permitted. There are lots of studies online, and I have slides on this. I didn't know how interested people would be. It's something that has been now printed out. The locality is not permitted to consider health effects when deciding on this special use permit, because it is preempted by federal law. And as long as we comply with federal law, it's not a zoning consideration. But I'm happy to share with you any information about health effects if you would like. I have slides with that information.
I guess the county's not allowed to, but as a citizen, I can.
If you Google it, it'll come to you very.
But I could also, that could affirm my opinion on whether or not to be there.
I'm going to take
Yes,
away
absolutely.
the phone now.
Okay.
I just
No
mean,
tumors over here.
Are you at the end of, I don't want to ask Mark his thing until
I'm
you're
at the
done.
end
So
of
are
my
you set now?
presentation.
Okay.
Can I ask one more thing, because you did mention Verizon and whatever, somewhere. T-Mobile, right, these are just people who you may have lease arrangements with, these are.
They've given milestone letters of interest to say that if you are able to construct this tower, this is an area where we would like to improve our service. I just learned from Chris today that they're now in negotiations with Verizon for an actual lease, contingent on zoning, et cetera. So that's as far as it is. They're not 100% committed the way Chantel is at this point.
Can I ask one quick question, Milestone, again? So you've been doing this about 10 years with municipalities and schools and so forth. Are there any instances when schools and municipalities have not renewed a lease because they weren't happy with the arrangement?
For a single tower?
Yeah.
So typically, it's about a 30-year lease, so I haven't experienced that. So this is a long-term lease. There might be, there could be, there's no reason, they have the right to terminate a lease under certain terms. It just depends on the terms of lease. But typically, no. We haven't had any issues where that had to happen in any particular lease.
There's a question back here.
Yeah, I just had a question and a comment. There's a lower field from the football field, and I'm just wondering if you explored that as a potential site.
The decision to put the site here was made by the schools, similar to Albemarle High School. It wasn't a milestone decision. This is where the school said, you can put this, it won't interfere. I had the same question. I drove around and wondered, why not here, why not here, why not here? And this is the location that worked with the schools and.
Okay.
So do you have an answer or?
I don't, so that was deemed his level of.
So that's more of a facilities use question because they look at the whole property and they say, what do we use it for? Where are the sports, the activities, foot traffic? Where can we tuck this away in the property where it can have the least impact on their activities? Because their priority is to serve the school activities and students, and they're not going to put it anywhere where it might interfere with their use of the property. So.
Or future use.
Or future use, expansion, or anything like that.
I guess the other comment I make is I'm cushioning there in the little rectangle. I want to thank Scott for his early successional forest that actually blocks the view for me. But I think everyone should understand that this was all farmland not that long ago. So the trees that you see growing there are not that old and they're pretty weak. So all it takes is a hurricane or a windstorm to come through and people's exposure to the sight line of the tower could be radically changed. So it's just something to keep in mind. I mean, it's kind of an unusual property area because it's heavily residential and right next to a school. So I want people to understand that. I think Scott's not planning to do any clearing because there's a nice little wetland area down in there too that Stockton Creek actually feeds into. So it's a pretty sensitive area, and I appreciate the young person here sort of recognizing some of the localized potential impact.
And that's what prompted my question regarding the safety of the tower itself. Because we were affected by the derecho there. And, I have no earthly idea how many of these things are up in that configuration for how long.
We have structural engineers who do those measurements for the wind with the loading that is proposed. So with the maximum loading, they would provide that report, and that's done for every site. I don't have any knowledge of a site that's failed.
Do you know what the standards are that it's built to?
I don't
So in
know.
other words, you're talking winds, you talk of the derecho, I mean, this is going to be more common of occurrence rather than less. It's not going to happen every year, but this is not going to be surprising if we have something of that level come through again. So the question would be is what is the standard, and that was a very valid question based upon that.
We have a lot, and then we have, as Ms. Mallett knows, we have lots and lots of personal wireless service facilities, as our zoning ordinance calls wireless facilities, throughout the county. There are lots in our area, in fact. and they are small, and usually 30 inches at the base and 18 inches at the top. And when the derecho came through, none of those was toppled. So I feel quite confident that something like this would be constructed to withstand.
Yeah, Lori, if I could, I'd just jump in and note one thing. I don't know if it got called everyone's attention. The circle that you see around the site is the fall zone. If the tower fell over, that's the area it would fall within, which has to be totally within the property that it's on, or they have to have an agreement or an easement for the adjoining property that is going to go onto that. So it's intended to be there. I will say, as an engineer who's through the erosion and sediment control program, seeing them build the foundations on these things, I'm always surprised how over-engineered they are. But I guess concrete's relatively cheap versus your investment in that tower and all that equipment. So you'd rather put a little extra in and make sure that thing's not going to blow over. So.
This is the first one in my knowledge that has 5 layers in the county, and that's going to increase the drag for sure. And also the greater width that you're starting to, the companies are starting to propose now also has a far greater exposure than 18-inch offset flush mounts that we've gone with before. So you mentioned up there treetop category in one of your sidebars. Also that when the leaves are on the trees, it wouldn't be visible. And yet the photo I took and you showed a little bit further away one there by the football field, 60 or 70% of the pole is completely exposed. And our treetop ordinance is described as 7 to 10 feet above the closest tree, and this is 60 to 70 feet above the closest tree. And so I don't understand how this meets even remotely the ordinance that we have to use to address whether it works or not. So I just wanted to address that.
Yeah.
This is a tier 3.
Yeah, I was going to say, what she's saying is right. It's a tier 3. The towers that are 7 to 10 feet, those are considered what we call tier 2. That does not require a special use permit, which is an important point. And I think you were asking me to jump in on the process here. What they're asking for here with the special use permit is a discretionary act by the Board of Supervisors. That will require, what the steps are, they've gone through the initial analysis, the balloon test, they're doing the community meeting to get your input. There will be a staff analysis that will be provided in early January. The next step is the applicant has to decide if they want to go forward with the application as originally submitted, or if they want to make modifications to it. Assuming they don't make modifications, it would stay on the schedule to go to the Planning Commission by February 20th. The Planning Commission would hold a public hearing, taking input from the public on the application, and then make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. It would then be scheduled for another public hearing with the Board of Supervisors. If it was in February 20th, which is the Planning Commission, tentative Planning Commission date, it would probably be the April meeting. We have certain federal regulatory requirements we have to meet as far as the processing time for these applications. So we have to be a little concerned with that. So at the Board of Supervisors, they would then receive the Planning Commission's recommendation, have another opportunity for the public to provide input, and then they would have to make a decision weighing the impacts as have been noted here, and probably be noted in the staff analysis against other factors. For example, is one tower with 5 sets of arrays better than 5 towers with 1 set of array, which might be an alternative to this, and trying to measure how acute is that visual impact that's being created with this thing. I will note one thing you will not see in the staff analysis or any of the public considerations is those health impacts that we're talking about. We will be precluded by federal law. We will not even discuss those. They are not part of our consideration at all.
But we legally are allowed to use aesthetics and the effect on the viewshed. That's been taken to the state Supreme Court, and we're solid on that.
That's correct. And I would also note under the county's policy that the entrance corridors, which Route 250 is one, in historic districts are of special consideration. So that's another factor that can weigh into the board's decision on this.
and the Crozet Downtown Historic District and the Gilbert Avenue Historic District is located, as well as the scenic highway and the Clemens Corridor. So the staff, when they're doing their evaluation, they will use our wireless ordinance for evaluation, even though
That's
it's
correct.
a tier 3. The same standards for decision would apply.
That's correct.
Okay. Which is why they recommended against the one at Alma,
At Alma.
because it didn't meet the rules. Okay, got it.
But staff's analysis is just on that policy, and there's no weighting by us on all the other factors that are in it. That's why,
Which may or may not.
frankly, that's why there's a board decision versus a staff decision on it, so that all those other factors can be adequately considered.
Is this, or would this be the tallest of the tier 3 in the county?
I was just puzzling on that, I can't remember, Lori, if this one's actually taller than the Albemarle one or not.
It isn't, but there are lots of towers that are taller than this
There are
one
some older towers that
that
are very.
pre-existed the wireless
And
policy.
the one on Airport Road is,
Yeah.
I don't know how tall it is, but it's visible for 5 miles.
And the one by
It's
Fashion
huge.
Square.
It would never be allowed. Fashion Square is huge. The one at Greenbrier is also huge, and those were all put up before the rules existed.
How big was the one they put up at the forestry building that made it look like a tree?
I don't know how tall it is, but its
I wanna
concealment has been rather effective, because whenever I see it, I don't notice, which is funny, and I wasn't in favor of doing it.
Would it be shorter if they did 3 instead of 6?
Oh, for sure.
3 carriers on it.
Yeah. Why did you pick 6?
5.
5. Why did they pick 5?
Well, it's a combination of the optimum height for Chantel, which was the dedicated carrier. So Chantel wanted a certain rad center. They wanted to be able to broadcast from, I believe, 135. And so if the school was going to be above that, there has to be 10 feet of separation there. So that was going to be 145. So that's where we started, with what Chantel needed for the network. Is that fair?
And mentioned the one tower that sometimes they are disguised to look like trees, and of course, there are a whole lot of 150-foot trees out here. And people have different views of those things. I'm curious, is that even an option for a tower out here? Is it something you guys would ever think about?
All I can say is
as far as visual impact?
representing the applicant for that particular one, the board did not look favorably upon the fake tree. So
We thought it was ridiculous, but the forestry department wanted it, and we said, go.
But you just said.
But
that-
we
You
also,
said you like it.
well, what we did make them do was to carry the fake greenery all the way to the ground. They had proposed stopping the fake greenery like 30 feet up, and that would have been until, would not have worked, let's put it that way. So,
The only other thing I'd note, and I know you said that the school board gave you the site, to your question, or to somebody made a comment, I think it seems like it would be interesting to know whether the lower ball field location, the one that's further off
The
of
practice
250, would be an option at all. Again, I'm just thinking about visual impact. I mean, it's a big tower, but if you move it back a couple hundred feet.
Yeah, but if you move it lower, you have to make the tower higher to make the height requirement that they require.
So maybe it's,
Yeah.
and this is the shooting for the moon request.
Right.
Was Stony Point Tower tier 3, or did it come through the process for a different reason?
it was a tier.
It was tier 3. I mean, I guess I think Mark talked a lot about the county ordinance. And, you know, we had this was bigger with more, with 5 instead of, I'll have 3 or 4. I can't even remember, but I guess one of the points I made then, and I will make now, is that, you know, I understand the benefits that it can provide to the schools. I did wonder when we were presented with the Albemarle High School tower, and a lot of the content of the presentation was how much the school would benefit from this. And I couldn't help but to wonder how people would feel if it was a private property owner who would be benefiting from this in this way. And so if we have an ordinance, you know, is it compelling to co-locate and use this business model so that it is more appealing for the schools and,
What was that
you
whole put
know.
up, the album?
I mean, this is under.
Last 6 months.
Yeah, and so that came through and we were presented with lots of, you know, how students would be able to, you know, there would be no snow days anymore because people could work from home and they could have money to give tablets except for the power goes out, so I don't know how that works, but maybe there's a tower for that, I don't know. I guess that is one of my main stumbling blocks is if this was coming to us and it was just on a piece of property and the benefits, the financial incentives were removed from the school. You know, we have our ordinance and I think it's a tricky play to.
Maybe we can finance the Crozet Plaza.
Is the height related to the amount of money that the schools get?
Yeah, and then the plaza.
And or is it, do they get more because there's 5 towers co-located on it? I mean, would this bring in more revenue than the one that's in Alamo? Because of that?
They'll get more revenue because they get, 40% of the rent from each carrier. So there are fewer carriers, there's less rent. And there's the one-time fee for installing each carrier.
But I still don't see how, if this all goes into the general fund, that it's going to truly benefit Western more than other schools. I mean, it's great that the whole pot increases, but
Talk to your school board.
So I have a question, and I'm just now clicking onto this, but the Albemarle Tower is only 125 feet tall. This one is 145 because a private company needs it to be highest, right? It has nothing to do with that's best for the school. It has to do with Chantel, is that the name of it, Sprint, saying we need to have at least 135, so if you're going to give the school that, you have to make the tower larger. My question is that already, like this tower doesn't go up unless Chantel has its, I mean, why is the private company the one to dictate that this is going to be a monstrosity? And the picture that you took from 100 Miller School Road, that's our property. You took it from our driveway is 500 feet long, goes down, our house is even higher and closer to that. So I'd love to send you a photograph to have a simulation done of that just to see what it will look like. But I'm wondering why a private company is the one who has the most influence of how tall kind of a monstrosity this is going to be.
Well, in Albemarle County, as in most Virginia counties now, it is not permitted for a tower developer to come in and say, I'm going to build a tower, a spec tower, and then invite carriers to come on once it's built. Because what happens, especially in rural areas, is towers went up and there's nothing there. And that was an unhappy situation for boards of supervisors in rural areas. So you have to have a carrier, you have to have a dedicated carrier to even make a submission for a wireless facility. And the carrier is, a partner with Milestone, telling Milestone, this is what we need for this to serve our network right here. And that's why the design is driven by that carrier.
But if Verizon had come forward, obviously a Verizon or an Antelos is going to be lower down the pole, so they don't seem to have a problem being lower than 135
Well,
feet.
it costs, I would estimate $250,000 to develop and build one of these things. And if you can come on and co-locate on something that's already there, you will compromise. And actually, if you can go on at 125 or 115, that's a lot better than building a single tier 2 monopole by yourself for $250,000 and being at 85 feet. So this is a great opportunity for carriers to give excellent service in the area with very little infrastructure costs.
But are you saying that this tower would become economically viable if it was 120 feet rather than the 145 feet? Doesn't become reasonable financially, or we're stuck at 145?
Mr. Lynch, I don't know at what point it would become economically not viable. It would become less and less so until it reached that breaking point. But, there would be compromises.
Well, as a developer, we always go with what our client wants, and that's Chantel. We will never build a tower that's higher than the height they need for their network. That's our starting point, always.
So Chantel, so this is fully funded by, so Chantel is building this entire, and funding this entire project? This is, no.
Milestone is
Milestone, excuse me, is doing that
So we're the
portion?
steel guys, we're the guys that build the actual infrastructure, and we own the tower, and then our client is Shuntle, because they're the ones that come to us and say, hey guys, we really have this huge gap in this area, can you help us build infrastructure so we can have our needs filled in the network? So it's a two.
So as Milestone would construct the tower, we would then co-locate and get a building permit to put our equipment on site.
Milestone's not gonna do that without it.
Right.
Shut down.
Right. Have to have the clearance, okay.
Which was the company that, I'm confused. The company that did Albemarle, the partner who did the Albemarle high school tower, didn't need as much height.
So height varies depending on geographic area and the configuration of the network. So, sometimes they don't need that much height, sometimes they need more. It just depends on where their other antennas are located within the network configuration, and it also depends a lot on topography. That's what drives the height that the carriers need.
So are you saying that the height of the tower is in part a result of where the school said they wanted it built? What Mr. Roach was saying, maybe a lower, place it on a lower location, you're gonna need to build a higher tower?
Yes.
And to follow up on Ms. Moore's remarks, if I were a private citizen looking to install this on my property for personal gain, I would have shown up to represent the interests and discuss with individuals why we were making this decision. And I'm unaware of any school board members who have shown up this evening. I'm unaware that anybody has authored a letter do they support this? Because I don't see any support from the school here. I see a technologist who's going to tell us how it's going to be used, but I don't see anybody from the school board who made the decision. Right, because you wouldn't be here if the school board didn't say, we desire this, we want this on our property, you would not be here right now. And yet no one from the school board has shown up to advocate for this.
Well, we'll be able to answer the questions regarding the school's use of the site with our technology representative.
I think he's done a great job. I got my questions answered, but we have other questions that remain.
Yeah, it would have been nice if the school board. Right?
Right, and I don't know the school board certainly, but when Albemarle High Schools came through school board, not necessarily, I don't know the school board, or we had 2 or 3 people there, but they speak in front of the board, I don't know the names you made reference to.
They were from the
school
administration.
Dean or Vince Shiver?
Yeah, we did have, they were represented there and were able to give very specific, I think a little bit more specific questions that we're asking here about what they predicted as far as coverage and the advantages. Again, not speaking for them, but my main takeaway was they would like to have seen this happen for Albemarle High School. That there were lots of advantages for the school.
So I guess they just assume that it should have lived in that.
And we'll certainly try to have that same continuing.
Say, is anything expected of us tonight, is there going to be a resolution related to this? So there's going to be another opportunity, and perhaps we can reach out to the school
I
board.
think it's up to the group as to whether you want to
Well,
see
the other-
anything else or not. I mean, I think they outlined their timeline. Planning commission will be sometime in February, so there's plenty of time.
Right.
If we want to take a view, if we want to talk to school.
Well, I think the relationship with the school is important. It's a public partnership with a private company. That relationship is important.
I think all that said, though, I'd much rather see the tower at its lowest possible height rather than, and if that meant only 3 instead of 5, I'd probably be okay with it and say, well, more prone to say, well, that's what they have at Albemarle, it was approved there, versus that we have to be the biggest kid on the block to get 5, squeeze 5. I don't know if the county has any position on 5 versus 3 or what yet.
Might depend on where you live.
I mean, it sounds like he's asking for 135, so that, there happens to be room below that for 5.
The other thing
Of the height already.
was, how would you view it, which I think is more important. If it was on somebody's backyard, we'd be raising a whole hell. Correct.
Right.
And so-
There would be a
I think-
visual
I think
impact.
creatively, and I'm gonna say it just because that's who I am, and I think creatively, this partnership with the public school leverages the kids, which is really what is planned, because nobody wants to say no to the kid. And so that's a tough spot to be in. And I think that's a very creative way to create business and form a partnership. Well, I think one of the considerations that Tom brings up, and we've talked about around, but we've not said, was, you know, we didn't get anywhere close to even thinking about it if this was in my backyard.
And I'll rephrase what I said before, because I don't want to speak, not that part, because I did mean what I said there, but for as far as the school board, when the Albemarle Tower came before Planning Commission, I think the information we were presented with and some questions that came out tonight is how would that money be distributed, and would it stay in this area, or would it be for the whole school district? And some of what we were told at Planning Commission that night were, if there were extra money, these would be things that, from a technology perspective, they could provide to students. And which are all things that, you know, would be lovely to have every child with a tablet to take home and all these things. Like, that's what we heard. And so I can't.
I mean, it's only fair as the taxpayers who are bearing the brunt of the impact would benefit directly.
Right. I mean, we were definitely given a snapshot of if there were money to be spent on things, this might be the type of things the school could do that they currently maybe can't do. But back to what you're saying.
Well, it's not to say that there's not compromise somewhere, you know, like Tom is saying, there's probably some compromise out there. I'm just saying, you know, let's try to put it in an apples to apples.
Right. And my biggest question is setting a precedent. We have an ordinance and we say if it's okay for Albemarle, or then we go a little bit higher, we have a couple more, a little bit bigger, and the next sentence a little higher, a little bigger, and then we have a private owner who has a really great location for some reason, and then we say no to you because you're not. Yeah, I mean, that to me is slippery slope.
Well, it means we lose in court. If we're
Right.
not consistent, then we have nothing on which to fall back.
It means our
When we
ordinance
get
means
to-
nothing.
Right. That's a
Then
good point.
you have an empty ordinance.
That's a very
right?
good point.
Right. Could I speak to that point?
Yes.
So the analysis of the special use permit is whether it's detrimental to the community, so there's a cost benefit analysis there. There wouldn't be the same benefit if this were private property benefiting just private land on there. That's why, you know, we don't bring that kind of application, because it only benefits the carrier and the customers of the carrier. But in this case, there are lots of factors other than the visibility. And even though our ordinance and our wireless policy only address visibility, and that's all that the planning commission looks at, the board looks at all of those benefits, detriments and benefits. That's the point of a special use permit.
I have access to a town, I can call 911, I will tell you that that benefits me as a taxpayer. And it benefits me as a citizen. So any towers that benefit everybody in the community. So it's a little bit different. Because we know that in times of emergency, all those systems can go. So if the more access we have, the better off we are. So whether it's on school property or on my private property, it still benefits everybody. So I think it's not quite.
Well, I agree that it benefits everybody. I'm on your side with that, but I think there's more benefit to school property, and you're not going to see a carrier try to bring a 145-foot new facility on private property without that extra benefit to the community. Not in Elmore County.
The starting point was on volunteer fire company. That was the hook.
Exactly. It's all
I think we have one more question, and then I think we'll probably wrap up here.
Well, no, I'm just, when is this projected to be installed by? Like, what is the year that this is going to be put in? Not like, when is the lease going for, but when is this going to be constructed, put in, available to the school?
I mean, it depends on how the approval process goes, but probably at the end of spring, early summer, will be construction start date. We have to go to site plan, building permit, and that takes a little while.
as Mr. Graham explained, the earliest we would be at the Board of Supervisors for final special use permit approval, April probably, early April. So, and there's the site plan process after that.
And so construction takes about how long on one of these?
6 weeks. It's pretty fast. And, well, and since this is a high school, summer is probably what we would look at because it's school, yeah.
Well, then, so if there's time, I think hearing from the school board is important, at least from my perspective, both how enthusiastic are they truly about this? What are their experiences so far with the Albemarle Tower? If all the promises and the great benefits of it are being realized yet? And I think the whole economic question of is there a proportional benefit to a community that bears the brunt of one of these? I think we have time to hear from the school board. I think that would be important.
We typically ask them to come, I think, in the springtime, so maybe this could be.
January is probably a good time,
Yeah, could be a good.
with that specific question in mind. Sorry, Rebecca,
Okay,
okay.
my question is, if they have a current tower, they get money now, revenue, if they get any revenue now at Albemarle?
I think they're migrating the material onto the new tower now. So I guess there's some revenue coming in now.
So where does their money go? In the general fund too?
It stays in the school department.
Like the general school government.
Yeah, I think, save that question, I think that's stuff you can ask school board member. I guess the last question I had is, are there any other towers in the county that you could point to? Obviously, you talked about Albemarle's, which is, 3 units and 125. Are there any other towers you would say are similar to what this one would look like anywhere in the county that you're aware of? Just to give people a suggestion.
I think maybe the closest analogy, if you can visualize when you're looking at it, is power towers. On several power towers, particularly if you're on the bypass and you're heading east, carriers put wireless antennas on top of those power towers, and those are monopoles. They're steel monopoles. So if you can eliminate from your vision, in your mind's eye, the wires, you can kind of get a sense of that. The reason why it's difficult to give you a good example is many of the facilities in Albemarle County are just brown monopoles with one carrier on them, and then at the other extreme, we have the pre-ordinance facilities that are lattice towers or guy wire towers. They're 300 feet tall and they have 6 carriers. So you have 2 extremes.
So are there specific transmission co-located facilities here?
They're at that height.
I don't know how tall those are. I'd have to
There's
check.
one in Virginia Power, right? Isn't there one?
There are lots of Dominion power towers that have wireless
But I just don't know.
antennas.
The Boyd Tavern one is pretty tall. I'm thinking that might be the closest out.
Where?
64 East at Boyd Tavern is between 250 and 64, and it is a monster.
I think it's a lattice tower, isn't it?
Maybe. And one other question I would like Mark to address, because I always get confused. The expansion ability, this would not be called a tier treetop anymore if it were approved. And that means if I have the right category, what Bill Fred says is once it gets put up, the board cannot prevent the constant widening of the arrays out to 20 feet. And that was the situation that is on the Georgetown Road thing, which I was unhappy about too, is if it's in that category and it's not restricted by the growth of the tree nearby, the reference tree, or being called the treetop tower, then once the pole is up, we cannot prevent its being increased 10 feet at a time in height or 20 feet wide. And so that's something I will have to verify again, which I have to do every single time because I keep getting the categories mixed up. But anyway, that is something we need to be aware of also.
It's not like the way that the board handled that with Stony Point, which was also a tier 3, which Greg Kempner and set conditions that categorized the height and the standoff, the color and so on, as concealment elements that if defeated would then be a substantial increase in size. So you can do that with a tier 3. You can circumvent the Spectrum Act.
However, that wouldn't apply here if we're 70 feet above the closest tree. There is no concealment element that's going to work.
It was the same situation with Stony Point. That was the tier 3 that appeared like a treetop tower, but it was not based on a reference tree. So they did do that. That was the mechanism that they used.
So the application should come forward with that in mind.
Yes, it's actually, you're making a great point. As part of the board's consideration, they can put reasonable conditions on, as part of approving a permit, the special use permit. Those conditions obviously have to have a reasonable nexus to what our goals are within our county policy. But as long as we can make that nexus, we can set reasonable conditions on the pole.
So we're saying that if the trees go from 70 to 150 feet, that the tower can eventually go up to 250 feet? Is that what we're saying? I mean, I'm trying to understand, right? As the tree, it's not gonna go up behind the trees or in the line of sight, okay.
There's a provision for tier 2s, which are, the height of a tier 2 is 10 feet taller than the tree. You actually survey the heights of trees.
Okay.
This is
not for
that.
tier 3, okay.
But the width of the array, as approved, could be considered a concealment element in itself at 50 inches or 80 inches or whatever.
And the board
you're proposing.
could
That
count
would
it like
then be
125
the
foot tower,
restriction.
right? I mean, it's not set, right? The board could say, hey, we don't want 145, we want 125.
If
I
they made
guess
a
they could.
determination that the visual impact, the difference of the visual impact was inconsistent with county policy, yes.
So, okay,
And then it'd be up to
so,
the company to decide if they want to proceed based upon that.
That's correct.
right, so the board could put that in as a contingency, say.
Yeah, that was my point, that when I said these are discretionary acts of the board. The board can make a determination it's inconsistent with county policy, but we better be in a good position to be able to defend that based on the policy that we have.
Well, the first basis started with updated photos with the 5 arrays on. That's one.
That's essential before the.
So that we can have the simulations that show the 5.
Okay.
This has been a great information presentation to the neighbors and to all of us.
Thank you so much for
And
allowing
it
us
was
to
done
do
in
this.
a very collegial kind of way. Did our last meeting. I just want to put that out, and we appreciate it. Well, I certainly appreciate it, so thank you very much for your presentation and the way you gave it.
Thank you very much. And let me reiterate, I have cards, so if you have questions later, please don't hesitate to contact me. He's easily reached.
Do you have that PowerPoint available to us?
It's so long, I can package it and make it if you would like it, or I can
Is there
send you
particular
pieces.
slides you're interested in?
Yeah, the coverage slide.
The coverage.
The coverage.
The map. When that map is available, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, if it was, without the photos, I mean, that would make it more reasonable with the maps and everything besides the photos.
Yeah, it's just a map. The
Okay.
pictures are fine.
Okay.
Okay, Lori, Chris, thank you, and gentlemen, I didn't get your name, but thanks a lot for the information, Mark, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.
And then I'll reach out to the school board members and see if we can have a conversation and follow up in January, so I guess hold your thoughts on that. That was really our main agenda item for this evening. I know at the last meeting, Costas mentioned about having a discussion about sort of growth versus infrastructure, and did we want to say anything specific to the board about that or not? I guess I'll leave it to the group to say it's 8:30. Do we want to have that discussion now?
No.
We have
That was very, it would be nice to know what. It would be nice to know from the county what infrastructure projects are on the drawing board and at what phase they're at.
We need more than 15.
When money, what time they expect.
So what's in the CIP coming our way
Right.
would be a great, and
And that
that,
can be on our list of in the new year, when we have meetings with some breathing room.
Right.
The other one, I bring up is, I think Sean asked at the last meeting, the possibility of having a Old Trail 101.
Yep, I have sort of a list of future potential topics for some of our, first quarter meetings, and that's another one.
It would be also good if we could ask Elaine, because she was working on those projections of figures of build-out.
Yeah.
If in fact she thinks with the build-out, I mean, I know it's in the CIP, but is there in fact with the build-out expected additional infrastructure projects that would be needed? If they can look into the, telescope and see if they see anything on the horizon.
I think actually, I talked to Elaine, I think she's going to be joining us for a February meeting, so maybe we can add that to that topic. I specifically asked her about doing your whole trail sort of recap, to give her longevity here. She said she'd be able to, at least add her perspective to that. All right, sounds good. Any other
I guess the
discussion,
other announcement, I'm
announcements?
not sure has hit officially, although I think it's all been passed through the electoral board, is that there'll be a new precinct created at Laws. So we'll be back to 5 precincts in the Whitehall district again, because the populations voting at Brownsville and Crozet have become so huge, having a hard time getting 3,000 people to each of those, or 3,000 voters to there. So that will be effective, as far as I know, starting for the 18 primary, which means if you would like to be an elected official or start to think about people you
More
can
volunteers.
pounce upon, we now have to staff a whole new precinct out there. And so that will be a great,
And does that-
wonderful service to the community.
Does that essentially take those 2 precincts and turn them into 3?
Yes, so it'll shrink down. People basically south of, well, I'm not sure where the lines are there, but something like from Mission River, south of 250, and then some part of north as well.
Anything else?
Still won't have to drive very far, so that's
So
good.
if I could bring up data on the survey, and I'll turn it over to Sean to tell you where we are.
That's why I have a question mark.
Right, we did have some problem in getting some of the data validated, which was, I guess, the biggest hurdle that we coming up against. And that's kind of been worked out essentially with the aid of some more money from the Crozet Board of Trade, thankfully. And where we are.
Yeah, so essentially, we have all the data in, it's in good shape now, and it's really on my shoulders to crunch the numbers and put it in a sort of digestible way for everyone. The plan is for the Gazette to run at least the top line numbers in their January edition, so that will be everyone's first look at the raw numbers. And then we will hold a session or two, one probably in the CCAC and one outside of it, maybe a special meeting where we can dig a little deeper into the numbers and what we should actually then do with these numbers from the voice of the community, where there's consensus, where there's disagreement, and how to sort of best leverage this undertaking that certainly took a lot of time and effort, and so we should maximize the benefit from the data as much as we can. We can talk about the ways in which we can do that.
Sean, are you going to be the author of that first document?
I'll be one of the principal.
The only reason I say that is because the first presentation is generally the most important. That's the one that people will remember, focus on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think our basic plan was between me and Tom Gudebrock, who is the director of the Survey Center at UVA, who kind of also was the other technical expert on this. We'll come up with some sort of presentation for everyone and eventually try to get together a comprehensive report. All the data eventually will be available to people online to look at, so they can peruse it at their own leisure. But it does take a little while to make sense of it and to tell the story out of all the data, because it's just not about numbers. We want to sort of talk about where most people in Crozet see development going, what they want, how they currently assess, where we are. And I think that will greatly inform some of the discussions that we have around this table based on, now we sort of have anecdotal evidence of what people want in Crozet, but a great thing about a survey is you get sort of a scientific snapshot of what does the average correlation, whatever. Crozation. How they see it. So
That's great. I mean, I just know.
I mean, one of the reasons
narrative is very
it took so long is because we did do a scientific survey. Unlike the last survey, which we did get, good input from, this one is, we were much more careful with the data and making sure that it was, reliable data and credible data that if we go into the county.
And statistically significant, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the initial narrative.
Yeah.
And I
Your
think-
survey can be great.
I mean, that was our thought at how to present now that we're getting, Sean's getting closer, was since it ran in the Gazette, even though lots of people got the letter with the code from the scientific sample, running it in the Gazette, and then, that would be, it would be a really easy way for people to see everything. And then I think the idea, at least tentatively, what we talked about was then hosting that community meeting, because there's a lot of stuff in here. It's not just about, development. There's tons of things that people might find interesting. People have time to digest it, see what they were surprised to see what questions they have, and then come to that community meeting where we have Sean and Tom Gruderbach to talk about process that people might have questions about and dig into it some, and then hopefully come to this group and maybe refine some of the topics to those specific to master planning type issues.
Well, I think it's going to be very important for a conversation on infrastructure to see the
Absolutely.
details of it.
And then, do you remember our number from the scientific? I didn't write it.
how many?
Yeah.
We're in the 700s of valid completed surveys, so that gives you a pretty good number to work with.
And then an almost equal number of the general public.
Yeah,
And
so,
I'll be fascinated when you get to the point of being able to assess the similarities and differences, if there are any, between the two groups.
yeah, that was one of the first things we looked at, and I would say for the most part, there was broad similarities between the public and the scientific
Good.
sample. There were some instances where it varied. We can get into that if you want, but the difference is, it's a slightly different person who volunteers to take a survey than those who are asked to take a survey. You could probably imagine that the ones who volunteer are a little more engaged. So that's why we'll probably be using the scientific for most of the presentation, because that's the truest representation of the community.
But as far as an interest level, to have 1,400
Yeah.
out of the 6,000 residents here is an astonishing number. When the countywide survey
We
was
could have a
382.
30% response rate on surveys, we would be doing very well.
Right, and I think there might be those questions, we talked about side-by-sides and that getting a bit confusing, but there might be certain particular questions where it might be, you could show a side-by-side scientific compared to those that self-selected. But for the purposes, I think, and there are some, I think that might be, but I think it can get confusing.
Right, I mean, I thought we were, right, at least.
Yeah, we
We're
there's a
trying to
lot of
make it-
money and effort into the scientific part, and so moving forward with what we want to present to the community, initially in the Gazette and to the board, the planning commission, we want that scientific sample, and we got that response that we needed. And we got an amazing response from the community as a whole, which isn't surprising at all to me, so, and like you said, if you guys could get that response for
Yeah.
all of your surveys, that would be amazing.
Well, people like to take surveys the closer to home it is for them.
Right.
Well, all good stuff. Good stuff
More
to
to
come
come.
in the new year. And with that, unless anybody has anything else.
I would just want to, all I'll say, I'm sorry, is that I would like to thank,
Or Kevin's on.
I want to thank the people, Sean and Tom Gruderbach and Tim, and I mean, others of us are there in the background, like, what can we do? We don't, but without that, and we did have people donate some money, and Crozet Board of Trade supported that effort, but without Sean and Tom Gruderbach and Tim Tolson, we wouldn't have this.
That's one of the great things about Crozet, is if you need to find somebody with the skill set, they usually can find somebody who's good enough to step up and provide those skill sets.
Right, and here we look, Sean came in because the survey interested him and we snagged him. We told you in a little bit, you got a little interested in our survey and here you are.
Anyway, I second that, and again, thank the whole survey committee. But
Yeah,
with
and
that,
actually everybody here, really.
but with that, I'll say, I think we're adjourned. Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a good holiday break, and we'll see you in January. Thank you. And I have cards from Lori, if anybody has contact.